Today's video is going to cover the spinal cord as well as the spinal nerves. We're going to finish up our central nervous system information and the bulk of our peripheral nervous system information here. So let's start with the spinal cord itself first. So the spinal cord is part of our central nervous system. Remember, the central nervous system consists solely of the brain and the spinal cord. And so the spinal cord itself runs from the brain stem. So as the brainstem, as that medulla oblongata is exiting through that large foramen magnum at the base of the skull, it's going to transition into spinal cord there. And that spinal cord is going to travel then from the brainstem to the level of about L2. If you remember, the bones of our vertebrae were numbered, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar. So it ends right about here at about the level of L2. So that's what our actual spinal cord is. Continuous with that brainstem, just as soon as it exits the skull, it becomes spinal cord, and down to the level of about L2. The spinal cord itself is covered with those same meninges that the brain was to help protect it. So the outermost layer being the dura mater, and then that middle layer with the arachnoid mater, and then the innermost pia mater layer that is directly touching the spinal cord, very thin layer. These work the same way they did for the brain. Dura mater, nice and tough and strong to help protect it. Arachnoid mater will help create that subarachnoid space for this cerebral spinal fluid. Pia mater sticking straight to the spinal tissue itself. So on that same note, with our similarities to our brain, the spinal cord is also surrounded by the cerebrospinal fluid. If y'all remember from our flow of cerebral spinal fluid, it could go through those lateral ventricles to the third, through that cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle, and then it could either go down the central canal or out into the subarachnoid space. And so the spinal cord has that subarachnoid space as well. And so the cerebral spinal fluid will circulate through that subarachnoid space, as well as down through the middle through that central canal. Cerebral spinal fluid for the spinal cord does the same thing that it did for the brain. It is going to give it some nutrition and it's going to offer some protection. In addition to the meninges, in particular, that dura mater there helping support and hold that spinal cord in place, it is also attached to by what are called denticulate ligaments. So denticulate ligaments, you can see them here. Denticulate ligaments are going to help attach help kind of anchor the spinal cord into the walls of the spine, basically so that it doesn't swing around. If you think of the spinal cord like a tail, right, it's dangling down from the base of your brain. And so every time you move, you don't want it to swing into the walls of the spine. So the denticulate ligaments will help work with the dura mater to help anchor that spinal cord in place so it doesn't swing around so much and get bruised up. So another feature of the spinal cord are these enlargements. And we have 2 big enlargements at the cervical and the lumbar regions. These enlargements are important because this is where you're going to form the nerve plexus. Okay? The plexus is going to be a network of nerves. And so basically these nerves are going to branch off and join up together and then branch again to go down your arms, and in the lumbar region to go down your legs. So we have enlargements here because we have more nerves coming off of the spinal cord there, trying to, in addition to the nerves that have to do the trunk, these need to go down to do the arms and the leg. So the spinal cord is reaching down to L2, right under that lumbar enlargement. And where it ends there, it's a little difficult to see in the picture, but where it ends there, it kind of comes to a point. That point is called the conus medullaris. And then below that point, you'll see just these loose nerves. You see this all down there? That's called the cauda equina. Cauda equina means horse's tail. Basically, what happens is your spinal cord stops growing before the bones of your spine do. So your spine continues to elongate, but the spinal cord does not. So the cord itself ends there, but the nerves continue to grow along with the bone so that they're exiting at, so that they are not getting irritated because they're not getting pulled or stretched. And they're so they can exit at their appropriate levels and their appropriate spaces throughout the rest of the spine. So the base of the spinal cord has these two kind of unique features. This conus medullaris, this like point tip that it comes to down at the bottom, followed by this horse's tail of how these nerves are not exiting kind of directly in line with where they come off of the spinal cord like they do further up, but reaching down some before they exit the spine. Okay, so the spinal cord itself consists of basically white matter and gray matter. So the picture that we're looking at here is if I took a spinal cord and I made a transverse cut through it, I'm looking straight down on top of it. So the white matter is the outside. Remember, white matter is myelinated. Remember, myelin helps our messages travel faster on the nerves. Gray matter is unmyelinated because gray matter consists mostly of cell bodies. So I've got neuron cell bodies and interneurons. Let's go here. And remember, inter is between. So interneurons are those little neurons. They were also called association neurons that communicate between larger nerves. So the gray matter is the inside in this picture. It's the purple looking part that basically looks like a butterfly. Okay, so the white matter is broken up into columns. You can see this here on our structure list. The white matter is broken into a posterior or dorsal columns, lateral columns, and then anterior or ventral columns. And those are just regions of the white matter. So for instance, our dorsal columns are going to be in the back, the posterior side. So there's our dorsal column. Lateral columns would be located laterally on the edges. So there's a lateral column. And then the ventral columns are located down in the front. Okay, you will need to be able to tell what is the front and the back when you're looking at cross sections of a spinal cord. Okay, look for this indentation here. This split is in the front. Okay, and that will help you orient yourself. And you'll almost always see it like this with the split or the front oriented towards kind of the bottom of your paper. So the white matter is broken into these columns. Okay, the dorsal column is going to be taking sensory information up to the brain, where the lateral and the ventral columns are going to take both sensory and motor information. So they're going to take sensory information up to the brain and they'll be bringing motor information down from the brain. The interior butterfly part there, that gray matter, okay, is broken into horns instead of columns. And again, they are based off of their location, right? So we have dorsal horns in the back of the butterfly here. We have anterior horns in the front of the butterfly here and lateral horns on the sides. Okay, so again, we have dorsal, lateral, and ventral. They're just called horns when they're in the gray matter. In addition to the columns and the horns, and you can't see it on this picture, but there's usually an opening right here in the middle. Okay, and that is where you would see that central canal running through the middle of the spinal cord there, where that cerebral spinal fluid can flow through and help provide some of the nutrition and protection to the cord itself. Okay, so let's look at how the spinal nerves themselves are formed. So these are now not part of the central nervous system, just like the cranial nerves. They come off the brain, they come off the spinal cord, so they come off a central nervous system structure, but they are not technically part of the brain nor part of the spinal cord. So for our spinal nerves, we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And on another picture where you can see them exiting, we'll talk about those a little bit more. But they're in pairs. I've got one coming out of the right side and one coming out of the right side. These nerves are all considered mixed nerves, meaning they carry sensory information and motor information. So they carry information out to organs, muscles, They carry information also back from those organs, muscles, skin, that kind of thing. Structurally, they're a little unique in the sense that the actual spinal nerve itself is very, very short. Okay, so if we're looking at the spinal cord here, okay, remember this is the front, right? So this is my ventral side, this is my dorsal side. There's that central canal right in the middle there, that little hole. Okay, you'll notice coming off of the spinal cord, I have what are called roots. So these are my dorsal roots here, coming off the back of the butterfly, looking like they come off the back of the butterfly. And these are my ventral roots here. You'll notice in the dorsal root, you have this large bulge right here. Okay, that is called the dorsal root ganglia. You'll notice that the ventral roots do not have one. It is sometimes abbreviated as our DRG, but that's our dorsal root ganglia. A ganglia is just a group of neuron cell bodies, not in the CNS. So we said that the gray matter was neuron cell bodies and interneurons. And so what this should tell you then is that I've got a nerve coming out of here. Whoops, I drew my thing the wrong direction. A nerve coming out that then is going to synapse with another nerve in here because I have to have that neuron cell body there. So that's where that bulge is coming from, because it's the neuron cell bodies are going to be located there. So these roots are coming together, and they come together to this small little area right here. Ignore the nerve that's overlapping them there. But this small little area here, that where they're coming together, that's the actual spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve consisted of the dorsal and the ventral root coming together. And that's what's exiting through those intervertebral foramen. If you remember from our bones, right, when we look at the vertebrae from the side, right, they have the facets, the spinous process. Ooh, that's rough. Okay, and then there's another vertebra below that has its own set of facets, spinous process, facets, right? And then there's a disc in between them. And so through this opening right here is where these nerves are going to exit, right? Remember that was my intervertebral foramen. And so this short little portion here, where the two roots have come together, where the dorsal and the ventral root have come together, is my spinal nerve. And that's what's exiting through that intervertebral foramen. Almost as soon as it exits through from the spinal column itself, it will split into a dorsal and ventral ramus. So my backside here would be the dorsal ramus. Rami is more than one. And the front side here would be the ventral ramus. This like whole area here where it has come off the front here and split. So I have dorsal ramus and the ventral ramus. So the dorsal ramus is going to, I'm going to get rid of this picture on the side here. The dorsal ramus is going to go to the posterior trunk. So the muscles on the posterior trunk, the skin on the posterior trunk. So this is going to be my muscles and skin on the posterior trunk. So it's basically our back, right? Trunk being the chest abdomen area. So this will be on the back side. The ventral ramus, it's going to depend upon whether it's in the thoracic or in the cervical and lumbar regions. If it's in the cervical lumbar regions, if you remember, this is where we have our enlargement. So the ventral rami in the cervical and lumbar regions are what's going to go form the nerve plexus. And we're going to look at what these are in a minute better, but this nerve plexus is where I'm going to find those nerve networks that are going to go down and control my arms and my legs. If the ventral ramus is in the thoracic region, so if it's in the trunk region, in that thoracic region there, these are going to go form what are called our intercostal nerves, between costal ribs cartilage, right? So these are going to go form our intercostal nerves. And so basically they're going to wrap around and do the anterior and lateral trunk. Okay, so we've got this nerve here that's going to be made basically by the roots coming together. I've got the nerve, and then I have the quick branch. So roots like a tree. Okay, here's the actual nerve. And then ramus actually means branch. So there's the ramus or the branch. And you'll need to have this basic structure down and situated in your brain. So these nerves have protective coverings, just like the muscle did. Okay, and so the names are very similar. Okay, the endo, peri, epi again. Just instead of mesium, remember it was endomesium, epimesium, paramesium. So instead of mesium here, I've got neurium. So the endoneurium is around each individual little nerve fiber. Remember, these spinal nerves are big nerves. They're made up of bunches of little smaller nerve fibers, just like a muscle was. So the endoneurium is going to wrap around each individual nerve fiber. Those nerve fibers are going to be grouped together again into fascicles, just like they were with muscles. So the perineurium is going to wrap around the fascicle. You can also see that in this enlarged picture here, perineurium wrapping around the fascicles there, holding those groups of nerve fibers together. And then the epineurium is going to wrap around the whole fiber. It's going to hold the fascicles together, and it's going to surround the whole nerve. Kind of left out the word together there. So it'll hold the fascicles together. So it's going to be on the outside of the entire nerve, wrapping around the whole thing. Okay, let's take a quick look at how these nerves are named. So I mentioned before that we had 31 pairs of them. So they are named for each, for where they exit the spinal cord and exit through the spinal column. They're numbered just like the bones were numbered. Okay, and so I've got where I have a little bit of a difference here. Okay, let's compare bones versus the nerves. So in the cervical region, bone-wise, I had 7, but I have 8 nerves. In the thoracic region, I'm the same. I have 12 and 12. Lumbar, I have 5 and 5. And then sacral, we have that one big bone, but it has, as you can notice here, it has multiple openings on it. So basically, I have 4 openings and I have 4 nerves. And then if you're wondering where the last few come from, they come from the coccygeal region. I've got 2 nerves even lower down there. Okay, so where it's wonky is in the cervical region. So my cervical nerves at first, my cervical nerves are named for the bone they exit above. So for instance, this C1 nerve that's coming out right here, this is the C1 bone. So when I come down here, right, this is my C4 bone, and so there's the C4 nerve exiting above it. Where it gets weird is that transitional C8 nerve. So here's my C7, and here's my T1. So C8 is below C7 and above T1. So what that makes happen then is starting in the thoracic region, now they're named for the one they exit below. So for instance, here's my T1 nerve coming out below the T1 bone. Here's my T4 bone. Here's my T4 nerve coming out below it. So thoracic region and lower, lumbar, sacral, coccygeal, they are going to be named for the bone they exit below. Okay, so let's look at these nerve plexi. What we're going to be doing is we're going to pick a handful of nerves from each plexus, the main big ones, and I also stuck with the ones that your book picks out. And I'm going to give you basically location, and then I'm going to have you working in groups, and you're going to get some functions and then be sharing those functions out with the rest of your classmates. Okay, so your book is going to give you some very broad information. That would be the best place to start. Like it'll say things like the nerve that controls knee flexing muscles. But then the expectation will be that you go back to the muscles that we learned, you pull out those specific muscles and you share those and stuff with your classmates. Okay, so we're going to look at the cervical plexus first. We're only going to pull one nerve out of the cervical plexus. Let me change my color so you can see it. Okay, and that is the phrenic nerve. Okay, and it's this one right in here. Okay, the phrenic nerve is such an important nerve because, and this one I'm going to tell you, go ahead and tell you what it does, because it controls the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the muscle in our chest, right? Here's our chest, there's our lungs. The diaphragm is that muscle underneath that helps us breathe, right? So basically, this phrenic nerve controls our breathing. And this is also the only nerve that we're going to pay attention to where the nerves originate. So the phrenic nerve, remember, these plexi, this plexus is going to be made of this network of nerves. You can see all these nerves kind of coming together and then branching back out. You can see the brachial plexus below, see them kind of crossing and branching. This phrenic nerve is made of branches of C3, C4, and C5. And why this becomes important is because, as most of you know, right, if here's my spinal cord, if I injure my spinal cord here, everything below it is non-functioning, right? And so if I injure my spinal cord, my cervical region of my spinal cord, this is a critical kind of boundary because while any injury in the cervical region is most likely going to result in quadriplegic paralysis, all four limbs being paralyzed, the difference between being hooked onto a ventilator and being able to breathe on your own is very, very different. Okay? And so anything above this C3, C4 level, okay, you are hooked on a ventilator. You are unable to breathe on your own. Okay? Below that, still having some of that function, then you would not most likely not be hooked onto the ventilator, which is a huge, huge difference in your mobility and your quality of life. Okay, so looking at our brachial plexus, remember brachial is arm. So our brachial plexus is going to be the plexus that takes care of the nerves that go down our arm. Okay, and like I said, I'm going to name them and then I'm going to leave some functional responsibilities up to you guys. So this brachial plexus comes off of that cervical enlargement formed from those ventral rami of those nerves. So the ventral rami of those nerves are going to come together and form these bigger nerves here. So our first one is our axillary nerve. So they're kind of in the axilla, in the armpit region. Okay, the next one is the median nerve, median being middle. So it's this one here that's running down the middle. It'll kind of go down the middle of your forearm into your hand. A musculocutaneous is this one that looks like it kind of got cut off here. You know, it's not very long. It doesn't go all the way to the end. It does exactly what its name says, does some muscles and some skin, in particular in that area. Radial is going to come down the radius or thumb side. Remember from our bones, the radius is on the thumb side. So it'll come down the back of our arm and the thumb side of our arm, where our ulnar nerve is going to be on the ulnar or the pinky side, okay, running down and getting that medial side of our arm down by the pinky side. Coming from that lumbar enlargement, we're going to see the lumbar and sacral plexus. If you see the term lumbosacral plexus, they've just combined the two. Okay, so these lumbar and sacral nerves are going to basically take care of our legs. Lumbar will take care of most of the front of the leg, anterior leg. Sacral will take care of most of the back of the leg. So from that lumbar plexus, we've got this big giant one here. Okay, that does all that branching there. That's my femoral nerve. It's going to come down and hit most of the muscles and skin and stuff on the anterior of our thigh. And then coming through that obturator foramen, remember this opening here in the pelvis? So coming through that obturator foramen there, that's my obturator nerve. And you'll see that's headed to the median aspect of our thigh. It'll get muscles in that particular area. The sciatic nerve is this big giant nerve here coming down the back of our leg. does a lot of muscles in our rear end and on the back of the thigh. And then when it hits about that popliteal region of the knee, right? Remember that popliteal was the back of the knee there? When it hits that popliteal region of the knee, it will split. And it will split into a tibial nerve that will run right down the back of the tibia, okay? Hitting most of the legs along the calf down into the foot. And it will split into the common fibular nerve. Remember, the fibula bone was on the outside lateral aspect of the leg. So that sciatic nerve hits about the knee and splits into the common fibular and tibia. So between the sciatic nerve itself and the branch, the two branches at the end, it covers probably 3/4 of your leg. Okay. And so it can, it has a significant impact on your functioning in your lower limbs. So we'll be putting you guys in groups and I'll be kind of explaining to you how you're going to get your functions and be sharing that out with the rest of your class.